this session is all about all the Azure connected features in SQL Server 2022. We will go, you may have seen some overview, but we'll try to go more details about some of these. My name is Ajay. I'm the group product manager for SQL Server and Arc team. And with me, I have Chuck.
I'm Chuck Heinzelman. I am a principal PM manager heading up the data platform analytics. So not Synapse, but like all the in-database analytic type stuff.
Yeah. So today we'll cover all the Azure connected features in SQL Server and how we are enabling them and some of the insights. Right. So at the bottom you have SQL Server, and then the dotted line is your Azure boundary. So how are we integrating with Azure SQL Server? So we have a few different features. Some of these features are all coming from customer feedback who are already on Azure today and leveraging some of these capabilities and want the same capabilities in their environments outside Azure. So this is the first step to bring this, and you will see more of this as we mature this product. So Azure SQL Managed Instance, we have Managed Instance link. If you have not heard, it provides 3 main scenarios. It allows establishing basically a link directly from your SQL Server versions 2016 and above. You can use it for reporting. It's a read replica. You can also use it for migration by doing a failover. And lastly, if you're doing like a DR instance in the cloud where you want to fail back and forth with SQL Server 22 only, that's available. The second one is Synapse link to do cloud scale analytics through the link, where we do near real-time replication of data from your SQL Server as a source to the cloud. It basically simplifies from doing expensive ETL or E and L, at least in the T. The rest of the stuff is bringing some of the PaaS capabilities to SQL servers outside Azure. So if you're familiar with Azure SQL today, in the PaaS side, we provide a lot of management capabilities to manage the inventories of your SQL Server, licensing. We automatically take care of patching and updates and backups. And we'll talk about how we're bringing that to SQL Server customers. Purview helps you manage, secure, and govern your data estate. So SQL Server is one of the sources that Purview can manage. So we'll go through a quick demo of how you can do all the central policy management and permissions and everything directly from Purview over multiple SQL servers, but instead of individually having to go to every SQL server and grant permissions for various activities. The next one is Azure Active Directory. This is especially useful if customers want to do multi-factor authentication or single sign-on, and a lot of customers who don't want to manage and maintain domain controllers are looking for this, especially even on VMs. If you're already on Azure, you don't want to stand up another domain controller there to manage your environment. And last but not least, in the security portfolio, we have the Defender, which will help you protect from vulnerabilities. It'll give you a detailed vulnerability report for you to take action, and also there's advanced threat protection, which is managed. So the goal with this vision for us is to bring all the cloud-connected scenarios unified through Arc for SQL Server. And Arc is basically an extension, which is a guest agent which runs in your environment. If you're used to VMs, you may be familiar with the IaaS extension or IaaS agent. Similar to that, you just install the extension, and you immediately get connectivity to all these features, and you'll be able to manage your data centers. It could be running on premises, on other hosted environments, or even other clouds. So you can run Arc, and if you have VMs running in AWS or Google. So with that, let me allow Chuck to start talking about the managed instance link.
Thank you, sir. So how many people in this room have had set up a DR scenario for their database servers? How many people truly, truly enjoyed that experience? Yeah, none of you. Oh, yeah. So one of the things about setting up business continuity and disaster recovery systems is it's not easy to set up. It's a lot of work, a lot of things are involved there. One of the things we wanted to do with Managed Instance and SQL 2022 is simplify that process for you. So how do we do it? Well, number one, Managed Instance is a PaaS service in Azure. You provision it, we manage it, you use it. You don't have to worry about patching the OS and all that stuff that you have to worry about on-prem. We take that out of your hands and put it into ours. Right? Don't have availability groups already? As part of the setup process, we will create them for you. You can do, and this is really cool, you can actually fail back if you have a disaster from MI into your on-prem SQL Server. It's an offline operation right now. And I'll show you, we'll talk about why it's an offline operation. In Preview, we have online. We're working on that. It's not there in GA yet. We're working on it. All right, so how does this work? In this discussion, I'm going to assume that we have all of the networking connectivity setups. You still have to do that. You still have to figure out how your on-prem SQL Server is going to communicate with your cloud-based managed instance. So whether it's an express route, whether it's a site-to-site VPN, however you need to configure that network connectivity between on-prem and Azure, we're assuming that's configured for you already, and that's number one here. So what happens next is you need to have an availability group on your SQL 2022 on-prem. You don't have to have a secondary. You can, but you don't have to. Then we create a distributed availability group across this whole thing so that we can actually communicate between the two. Once that's all set up, we seed your managed instance. So we can take the backup, move it over, get it all restored, get everything all set up on your primary, and if you're running business critical, you can have secondaries up there too. Once that's all set up, we start just natively moving the changes through. It automatically happens for you. You don't have to do anything to do this. And then you can even use that DR site or a secondary on the DR site even as a read-only replica for your, say, reporting or translytical workloads. This is a migration scenario for things for prior to SQL 2022, but for 2022, we can make this a true DR solution for you. Now, the offline disaster recovery. So let's say you do fail over to managed instance. Would you believe me if I told you you could actually restore a database from Azure Managed Instance into your on-prem SQL 2022? We made that possible. And we'll talk a little bit more in the demo about how that's possible. But what it comes down to is that database version. We have an internal, this is not your SQL Server version. I have to stress that. This is not the SQL Server version 16.0. whatever. This is the internal database version that we keep and we maintain and we bump between versions. If you want to restore something from one version to another, you can't go, and you'll see in the demo, you can't go from 2022 down to 2019. What we've done is we've taken managed instance, the database versions between managed instance and SQL 2022 are identical. They are compatible with each other. So how do you do it? You stop the workload in the cloud because, again, this is an offline operation. You do a copy-only backup of that managed instance database, and you restore it on-prem. It's that simple. Now, you do still have to migrate your instance-level objects and redirect all your applications. It's not like we have a listener here that's going to redirect you automatically. And then if you want to, you can create another MI link. You can set it up again for your disaster recovery failover to the cloud. All right, with that, I'm going to switch over to my other machine here, where I have our demo environment running. So in this scenario, I've got a SQL Server 2022 installed, which I'm connected to here. And I'm also connected to a managed instance where I've restored the same sample, or I've restored the sample wide world importers database to the on-prem SQL Server. So we want to use Management Studio to replicate this data. So we select the database, select the option to replicate, we go through the requirement check, and then you come here, you pick the database, and then you sign into Azure. And once you're signed into Azure, you get to pick which managed instance you want this to replicate to. All right, so we pick the one that we have that we're connected to here. And then when we connect next, we're going to do a few things. We've got a few things that we can set up here. But one of the interesting things is if you don't have availability groups and a distributed availability group already, the wizard can set one up for you. So you don't have to worry about setting this up ahead of time. So we click next, we see the summary of what's going to happen. You know, it's going to seed the database, it's going to create the availability groups. We click finish, and through the miracle of time lapse, we are done instantly. And now that this is complete, we can go into Management Studio and see what's really going on here. You can see a few things about this deployment. The database has been synchronized, and it's showing as synchronized now. We have an availability group and a distributed availability group that have been created, and we have seeded that database into the managed instance. So let's check the status of the systems in our setup. In the screen, in the query on the left, we've run it, and we can see that this is SQL Server, and it's running in read-write mode, and the database version is 957. That's going to be key. Remember, 957, we sync those. That's good. You're going to need that later. On the right-hand side, we can see this is the managed instance version. It's in read-only mode, and again, its database is 957. So let's go in and make some changes in the SQL Server and see how this is actually going to play through. All right. So we're going to create two tables in the wide world importers sample, one called vehicles and one called stock items to store the cargo information of those vehicles. And we're going to populate those with some cities in Texas. I will get to it right when I'm at a good breaking point. Yes, thank you. And actually, it's related to a later part of the demo. So these are populated with cities in Texas. Go figure, Bob Ward created the demo. So we've, when we run these queries to create the tables on the primary, on the on-prem SQL 2022, then we can open up Managed Instance and do a new query over here, and we can see that when we actually run this query, we're running against the Managed Instance there, just to prove that. So we can see that that data has been replicated up to the Managed Instance for us. We didn't have to do anything to set this up other than go through that wizard. Yeah, I will deal with that when we get to the demo. So now that we've seen those synchronized, we want to do a failover. So first thing we do is we select the database in Management Studio. We pick the database we want to fail over. We sign into Azure again. Then what we're doing here is a manual planned failover. So we need to make sure our workload is stopped since we are actually doing a cutover. So we don't want to lose data or lose transactions. In this case, we don't need these availability groups anymore, so we can have it automatically clean up after us. And we see the summary, we see what it's going to do, and when we're done running this, what's going to happen is that the SQL MI instance is now going to be our primary in read-write mode, and that link is going to be broken because we told it to delete the availability groups. So once we're done, we hit finish, and we can see the status of the database by running the same queries that we ran before. So we run those queries, and we can see now the managed instance is in read-write mode with a database version of 957. Now that we've failed over, how can we get back to SQL 2022? Since we have that compatibility between the database versions in MI and in SQL 2022, we can actually take that copy-only backup, which we already have in this demo. We already have that done. And what I want to show you is what's going to happen when you try to restore that to something that isn't 2022. So if you try to restore this to 2019, which this instance is, we go through the restore wizard here in Management Studio, and when we hit OK, we're going to get an error here, and the error tells us that we have an incompatibility between these database versions. So obviously, it's not allowed. So if we do that same thing, though, against 2022, we can see here with the restore header only that we are on the right database version. That's really something we want to stress here, is that the database version is so important here. And once we do this, we can actually issue this restore, and it will, I do want to tell you, we are restoring to a separate name so we don't disrupt the original. But once this restore is done, we can then close this wizard and see that we have the database now restored into our on-prem SQL 2022. So the question here is, if you fail back from MI to on-premises, do you get charged for taking the data out of Azure? You're going to get charged your standard egress fees for pulling that back up out of storage. You absolutely are. You know, that's because it's an egress from storage, and we charge egress fees, and of course the storage transaction fees, which are minimal, but they're still there. But yes, you will see egress charges on pulling that data out and back into on-prem. But that's just like you would with any other workload that's pulling data out of Azure. It's nothing special to the failback. All right. Any other questions on this before I move on to Synapse Link? Yes?
If we do the failover to Azure, and our main data center breaks down, burns down, whatever, and it takes a couple of days or maybe 2 or 3 weeks to recover everything, to build everything new on-premise, and we want to get it back. Any updates in Azure are not reflected in today's database, so we can always go back to any 2022 on-premise version.
So the question is about, okay, if it takes time for your on-prem data center to be rebuilt and you're running in Azure for a while, I'm assuming you're concerned about us because we auto-update the service. As long as we aren't changing that database version number, which is a very major thing for us to do. Yeah. I mean, it's a calculated thing that we have to do that. As long as we aren't upping that database version number, you should be able to bring it back to your SQL 2022 instance.
Yeah, you can set up a new link, and you'll have to reseed again. So you'll have to set up a new link. Let's say you don't have your entire machine is gone, and you have to buy new hardware and set up everything. It's like setting up a new MI link, and then seeding it. Or you can take a copy-only backup and restore it.
So the database version gets upgraded?
The 957 is, we upgrade that with major versions of SQL Server.
Only with major versions, yeah.
Yeah, we don't bump that on CUs.
Yeah. That's why you're able to back up even on premises. Mm-hmm. You can take a backup on higher CU and restore it on a lower CU or RTM, because we don't change.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to move on to there we go. I'm going to move on to Synapse Link. So this is one of my team's projects. So ETL is expensive. It's batch-based. Takes time to maintain. I never liked doing it when I was doing data warehousing. So what we've tried to do with Synapse Link is help you along with the E and the L of ETL. So what happens here is we built this new functionality into the database engine. It is not CDC. It is not replication. It is not change tracking. But it's built by the same team that built those and has the same core underlying ideas. What we're doing with Synapse Link is when you tell us, I want this table replicated to Synapse, we're watching the transaction log. And when transactions commit for that table, we're grabbing that information and we're pumping it out to blob storage. I'll show you that in the diagram in a little bit. But ultimately here, we're making copies. They are direct copies. This is not doing slowly changing dimensions or anything like that. We're making copies of your transactional system tables in Azure Synapse dedicated SQL pools for you to use for analytical purposes. All right? So the way this works, It works a little differently from 2022 and Azure SQL DB. I'll get into that a little bit. The first thing you need, you have your on-prem database, of course. You need a Synapse workspace in Azure. You need a dedicated SQL pool in Azure for this. It doesn't have to be only used for this, but it does need to be a dedicated pool, not a serverless pool. Then you'd need to install the self-hosted integration runtime on-prem, or on the, in the environment that can connect to that, that database. If your Synapse environment already has a self-hosted integration runtime attached to it, you can reuse that one. You just have to have one. It doesn't have to be on the same machine as the database server. This is what allows us to work with SQL for Linux, because the self-hosted integration runtime is a Windows app. It has to be running on a Windows machine, but it just needs to be able to connect to the database server over the network. Okay. You need to provide a landing zone. This is an ADLS Gen 2 storage account in Azure. This is where we put the data. And as we go through this flow, I'll show you what the process happens. Then we have this thing in Azure called the ingestion service. And that's the piece that reads the data from the landing zone and puts in the dedicated pools. If you are familiar with IoT situations, IoT applications, you always have a buffered ingestion point. You don't write from your device directly to your database. So this is the same kind of thing. SQL Server writes in the landing zone. The ingestion service reads from the landing zone, writes into the dedicated pools. So when you create the link connection, you tell us what tables you want to replicate. You tell us how much compute you want to use for them. And then Synapse, through the self-hosted runtime, tells SQL Server, these are the tables. Seed the tables in the landing zone. The first time we do the seed, we take a full snapshot of that table, right into the landing zone. The ingestion service picks it up and puts it into the dedicated pool. Subsequent runs of or subsequent to this, after that snapshot is taken, we're just exporting the changes. As a transaction commits, we're sending it to the landing zone. It gets picked up and moved into the dedicated pool. This works similarly for Azure SQL. The differences there are you don't need a self-hosted integration runtime. You don't need the landing zone. We deal with all of that for you. And that's, oh, and you can hook Power BI up to it, of course. All right, quick demo on this. Let's switch over here. All right, what I have here is I have 2 copies of the Wide World Importers database. One in Azure, one on-prem. They are identical schema-wise. They just differ in what data is in them. The cloud version has 261 rows in the customer table. The on-prem version has 402 rows in the customer table. That's the only difference between them. I have already created and have running the link connections in Synapse, identifying the tables that we want. So we can see by running this query in Synapse that we have the 261 and 402 rows that we expect to see, because, again, it's already up and running. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go in, and on the source systems, we're going to add some data. We're going to add 50 records on-prem. We're going to add 100 records in the cloud. Now, what this is going to do for us, what's happening behind the scenes here, after that transaction is committed, SQL Server is going to push the data. Most other ETL processes, you're pulling the data. You're adding load to your database server. In this case, SQL Server is pushing the data. One of our core tenets is minimal impact on the source system. That's how we do it. We built this new thing into the engine that actually grabs the data and writes it out so that you don't have to query CDC tables or query with the watermark pattern. So in Synapse, we can now run this query, and we can see that there are additional records in both the cloud and on-prem world. And we can even take it a step further and go into a Power BI report that's running in direct query mode. And it's taking a little longer to do than I thought. But anyway, here we go. We're going to the Power BI. Sorry. When we refresh this report, it had the old data here. When we refresh, because this report is in direct query mode, we're going to see those updated counts reflected in the data. So this is how you can, without writing a line of ETL code, go from your source transactional system to your analytical system while adding minimal impact on the source and doing it in near real time. Of course, there's latency because we have multiple hops, but this is near real time as opposed to a batch implementation. All right, are there any questions on this before I turn the floor back over? All right. It is all yours.
Sorry,
Oh, yeah.
one question. For now, it's only for dedicated pools, right?
Yes, we only support dedicated pools.
Okay, and it's an idea to put it in serverless?
So we are investigating that. The question was, is there a plan to put it into serverless? We've investigated that. There are actually some technical reasons because of the Parquet format. It makes it really hard to deal with high throughput transactional systems because you don't update Parquet files, you have to rewrite them, which makes it difficult to go into something that has immutable files. So we're working on it. We are investigating multiple options. We don't have any timelines yet. All right, it's all yours.
Thanks, Chuck. So moving on to the next set of cloud-connected features, they're all based on a fundamental platform we call Azure Arc. And why Azure Arc? Right, so if you look at any customer's enterprise ecosystem, they have a mixture of different kinds of applications running on different infrastructure. It could be on their data centers, it could be in a hosted environment or other clouds like Intel. And how do you, the challenges most customers see is each of these systems have their own processes, they have their own tools, and having a good cohesive view to both understand what they have as well as manage and govern is a very expensive task, right? So with Azure Arc, we are fundamentally changing this experience by building a single control plane where you can manage, secure, and govern your SQL Server running in any environment by bringing all these Azure management capabilities. And we'll take a look at some of these things. And it starts with what we call Azure Extension for SQL Server. In SQL Server 2022, we integrated this as part of the SQL Server setup experience. So if you have run the UI, you will see a page now for Arc Extension where all you have to do is give your subscription and your credentials, and we will automatically install the extension for you. And this extension opens up many capabilities like AAD authentication, Purview, Defender, inventory management. A lot of customers we talk to who have hundreds of SQL servers with different kinds of license types. Some of them are still managing the inventory through spreadsheets or other manual processes. This gives you a single plane where you can see everything through the Azure portal. And we also give you some other additional management tools like best practice assessment, which does health checks, security, and other features, which I'll do a quick demo. And this extension is very lightweight. It has zero performance impact on your source systems. It runs on Windows and Linux. And you can set it up manually using the UI, or if you want to deploy it at scale across multiple SQL servers in your environment, you can do it through Azure Policy. Or if you have tools like System Center, you can just download the script and run it through System Center execution script task. And you can do the same thing at scale. So along with this, we also introduced a cloud billing model, as we call it, pay-as-you-go licensing. This is also enabled through Arc Extension, where if you want to get started quickly with SQL Server, now it's also available for older versions down to 2016, is you don't need a license. You can just like in the cloud, you can just pay, spin up the instance, select the subscription type you want, whether it's standard or enterprise, and the monthly and hourly rates are there. So you only pay for what you use. It's ideal for intermittent workloads or seasonal workloads. Let's say you have only quarterly reporting, or if you're in the retail industry and you need to increase capacity for extra users and holiday shopping to manage peaks. Good scenario for using this. And after you're done using it, you just stop the instance, and after that, you no longer get billed. So you don't need to have a full-blown license, which you pay and have to use it 24/7. So definitely there's cost savings there. And this works in all cloud providers too. All you need is Arc. So if you have VMs running in AWS or GCP, you can use the same standard single billing model from Azure wherever your environment is. And you can onboard to SQL Server to Azure Arc multiple ways. I highlighted a couple of them, like 22 setup, the screenshot I showed. You can also do it through policies and tools, enterprise tools like System Center or Group Policy to deploy at scale. And we are also working on auto onboarding. If you already have Arc server in your environment, and if we detect SQL Server installed in that VM or your physical server, we can automatically enable the Arc extension for SQL, and you'll get all the features which we talked about. So let me walk you through a couple of examples here. So here I have a SQL Server 2019 instance, just to show that this also works with older versions. It's not just a new capability. So we are going to Arc enable this instance and see what features. So now here on the portal, you just have to click on the SQL Server Arc tile, and then you go click Connect Servers. You just go through the prerequisites, basically requires some permissions on your instance. Then you specify where you want to deploy the extension in the cloud side. So we pick a subscription and a resource group and a region. And then for license type, if you are using an existing license, that's fine. Or if you don't have a license, you can choose pay-as-you-go. If you want to switch the license type, that is also allowed. Let's say you started with license, full-blown license, and later you want to change it to pay-as-you-go so that you free up the license for that instance and give it to some other server, right? So you can do that too. And once you pick your license type, you can also exclude instances if you don't want to deploy this extension if you're doing it at scale. And here's the script we automatically generate based on the settings you did. You take this script, and then you go back to your SQL Server instance, which you want to Arc enable, and you run that script through PowerShell there. Again, if you're doing it at scale, you can do it through Azure policy, or you copy the script to a custom execution task and do it. It takes a few minutes to run the script. Typically around 5 minutes is what we have seen. And once that's done, now if you come back to the portal, to the Arc Server SQL Servers pane, you will see all your SQL servers here, right? You can see the last column where it says Arc-enabled SQL Server. So you get a single view of inventory of all your SQL servers from a single page. And there are a lot more insights when you go into a specific instance. So next, we'll go to one of these instances, and you can see that all the properties, like this is the version, the type of edition, type of license, number of cores, what operating system it's running on. So all the server level properties are exposed to you. And if you want to look at database level properties, you can also drill down to the database, and all the DB properties that you're normally seeing, like compat level, version, the database backup information, like when was it last backed up, recovery model, as well as some database properties like auto close, string, statistics are all available here. But a lot of customers would like to create some fancy reports to look at it at a bigger view instead of individually clicking at each database. So you can actually get that information easily through resource graphs, which I will show you next, where you can, let me switch there, yeah. So you can just write simple KQL queries where you can see the inventory of various informations like compat level. You can see which ones are still running in the older compat level, different version distribution in an environment, especially if you're running out of support versions and you need to upgrade or modernize. You get a good, quick idea of that. You get a good visibility into if you need to move up to a later compat level for your databases to leverage new query processing features. You can look at your license type and manage your licenses from here, the different types we lacked out. Backup information. You can look at databases which are not backed up, which could cause an issue when there's a disaster. So it helps you unlock insights and make you, as a DBA, improve some operational efficiencies to get you to keep your SQL Server healthy. And clicking on this, you can drill down to specific instances. And thereby have a targeted focus on those instances. So the next capability I want to talk about is, here, let me quickly forward. Best practices assessment. So one of the biggest things customers want to make sure is the SQL Server is healthy, both from a performance standpoint and security. So this is where best practices assessment comes in. So BPA is also another Arc-enabled feature. Once you enable it, you get this. So when you run the assessment, we have more than 500 rules. We work with our support team and our field engineers on what they see in customer environments. They give us feedback. We create rules, and we give you a dashboard where it runs these 500+ rules on every instance and every database and tells you the overall health of your SQL Server. Like you can see, and we also categorize them by severity of the issue that we think that need to be addressed first, from high, medium to important. We look at things like database configuration. Have you have right SP configure settings? Do you have the right trace flags? How is your memory usage? Are there anything you need to take settings you miss, like lock pages in memory, for example, right? And then you can click on any of these alerts to get more details on what configuration setting. In this case, it says instance file initiation has not been enabled for your instance. You can also look at trends. Is the health of your server improving or deteriorating, right? For all the issues that it has identified, you can also see this is like your task list. How many issues came in and how many you have resolved, right? That way you can keep track of your backlog of issues to make sure you're making timely progress on your issues and resolving them in a timely manner so that your server stays healthy. So this is also, again, available as part of the Arc extension, and something that I would encourage customers to use. And this can be done at multiple instances at scale. It gives you a good picture of your health of your SQL Server and helps your operational efficiency and reducing the incidents that might occur because of this. So that's a quick overview of the Arc-enabled SQL Server. Next set of features are security features. These are also available through Arc. So once you install the extension, we allow you to do Active Directory authentication with Azure Active Directory. We allow you to do governance through Purview, and then security through Defender. So let's look at each one of these quickly. So Azure Active Directory is basically useful for customers who don't want to be in the business of managing their own domain anymore. And it also enables scenarios like RBAC policies, which you will see through Purview. It allows you to do multi-factor authentication as well as single sign-on, which are very common nowadays for applications. And you can use this without creating logins, right? You can create users without logins in SQL Server and use Azure Active Directory as your way to authenticate your system. And we also support link servers. Once you install Arc extension and you enable Azure Active Directory, then SQL Server communicates through the Arc extension to authenticate and use all the policies and RBAC things that I talked about. The second one is Purview integration. So one of the biggest things is data cataloging, data classification to apply sensitivity labels, as well as controlling usage, access to the data. If you have guest users or if you have users by special roles, like let's say you have hired a consultant, you want to only give them performance monitoring usage. How do you give them granular permissions at scale across multiple SQL servers? Without this feature, nowadays customers usually have custom scripts or have to individually go to every server and manage permissions, and keeping track of that as well as cleaning them up after the user's access needs to be terminated is a painful task. This is where Purview comes in and allows you to do this centrally from outside SQL Server at scale. And this is enabled through Arc through. So let me quickly cover a couple of scenarios. Usually we see customers who want data access policy. Let's say you are somebody who is a business analyst and you want to create reports. You want access to a data source or data set, like a read permission or things, or modify permissions. You will have to have special request. Or if you have DevOps role, where I talked about monitoring and auditing, how do we give access to these kind of roles? Centrally is how Purview enables this. And you can also don't have to manage this individually from SQL Server perspective. The third one is self-service access, like just-in-time access. Let's say somebody is working on a report and suddenly discovers a data set that you own and want access. And if it's a big, large corporation, they don't know who the owner of the data is. They'll have to be searching for quite a while. And a lot of customers we talk to, it takes several months to find the owner and get access. So this simplifies the process to a few minutes. And I'll walk you through how that works through a demo. Right? So here I have an AdventureWorks database. And here I have a query against sales order table. Let's say I'm a business analyst trying to, who wants to build a report and understand the product sales information. And I only have access to this table. And I can see things like product ID and unit price and things. But I don't know the details of what the actual product name is. Right? If you want to do things like, what are the top selling products? So if I run a query against the product sales order detail, it doesn't have product name. So I know that product ID 870 here sold the most, like 4,000 plus units, but I don't know which product is. So I cannot do like targeted campaigns if I knew that more information. So how do you get access to this? So we'll talk about how self-service access enables this. So now this is where Purview comes in. So I go to Purview, and then I go search there. Since if the data is cataloged in Purview, I can go search on product. And here I see a few different tables with the name product. I go click on something which matches the server in the same server where I queried. I see a product inventory table, or a product table. I click on that. I look at the schema. Because we have automatically classified all the columns, I look for something which might give me the name of the product. So I see that there's a name field here. So then I think, OK, this table might help me do the necessary reporting. So I can right there go and click request access and put my request access without not having to worry about who the owner of this is and having to go through approval process. Now, as the data owner, I can come to the request and approvals page. I will see all the requests that came to me that needs to be approved. So I can go there, and you will see that so you'll get email alerts. So in the future, we'll have automatic approval process too. So here you can see there's a data access request from a user. I can, for the table product, I can click on the table to make sure it is a data set I own and what kind of data the person is requesting access to. Once I'm comfortable with the information that the access is being requested for, because I know the server name as well as the database name and the location, I can go back and approve this request right there. Now, once that's done, now if I go back as the original user that requested the access, you can see that they have been given read access a few seconds ago. So now this user will be able to go back and query the product table. This policy is automatically pushed down. If you notice, I did not add any individual permissions in SQL Server. So I can manually, SQL Server automatically polls Purview to see if there's any policies. Or you also have the stored procedure to automatically refresh the policy. Now, if as a user, go back and refresh the table Object Explorer on the left-hand side, and then let me also copy the query to join the table. Now you can see from sales order, I'll also see the product table listed here when I refresh this page. So now I'll be able to do the query and get the product information. Now I know that the most sold unit is water bottle, 30 ounce. So this gives me the next level insight I need to do some campaigns related to this, if I need to promote the products which are not selling much or do other additional incentive to grow the business. So as you can see, Purview helps you manage your SQL Server permissions centrally through either DevOps policies, data access policies, or self-service access, and gets you from access to insights very quickly, for otherwise normally which would take many, many weeks or months for several customers. So hope that gives you a quick overview of the two security features. The last one is Defender. Defender is basically your guard for your environment. Today, we have tons of vulnerability assessments, threat attacks happening all around, like digital crime has increased. So Microsoft actually blocks and protects hundreds and millions of attackers every day. And it's very hard for a lot of administrators, whether it's IT or database, to keep up to all the different types of attacks. So this is where Defender, with its continuously improving rules, especially for SQL, like SQL injection attacks or brute force attacks, are continuously modified. And we have tools like vulnerability assessment. Once enabled, it'll tell you which databases are unprotected, what kind of data is exposed, and you can take necessary action, just like the best practice assessment. We have vulnerability assessment report, which will help you mitigate those right there. And threat protection also works in conjunction to detect and block and respond to a harmful attack. So both of these can be centrally integrated with any SIEM tools, like Azure Sentinel or third party. So that way you can do end-to-end workflow on everything from intercepting the vulnerability all the way to having a response mechanism. So these are the various cloud-connected features that we gave you a quick summary of. And one of the key messages we want to make sure you take away from this session is we are making SQL Server a truly hybrid platform. The cloud innovation is happening at a rapid pace. And how do we bring that innovation to customers running SQL Server? Because some of these features, you don't want to wait till the next major version, which happens every few years, to get the same, right? If you want to be only on the latest to get the features, then you leave a lot of your estate unprotected. So you're not able to leverage those benefits. So which is why features like managed instance for disaster recovery or migration, Synapse Link for analytics, and Arc-enabled features like inventory management, license management, and security and Purview help you to really modernize your SQL Server wherever you are, right? If you're not able to migrate, or even if you're able to migrate and if you have a multi-cloud strategy, you still get a unified experience wherever you are. So with that, we conclude this session. This is the last session, so we are happy to take any questions. Otherwise, it's party time. Thank you.